Welcome to this flight of the Retail Pilot. I'm Ken Pilot, former CEO and current brand advisor, investor, and board member. I'm thrilled to share with you some of the insights from retail's leaders and legends, as well as my perspective on retail today. This podcast is sponsored by the following. Want to drive more traffic and conversions on your e-commerce site? Brands that use video see 41% more traffic from search engines, and that's just the start. Meet Firework, the leader in AI-powered video commerce. Trusted by brands like L'Oreal and Unilever, Firework turns any page into an immersive, shoppable experience. From pre-recorded long-form content to short-form and everything in between. With Firework, you can easily integrate social media videos into your product pages and run pre-recorded digital showrooms with shoppable content. Plus, Firework offers AI-powered virtual assistants to personalize shopper experience and drive higher conversion. That's why I'm an investor and advisor. Learn more at firework.com. Welcome to this flight of the Retail Pilot. I'm your host, Ken Pilot, and my guest today is Emily Gittins, co-founder and CEO of Archive, a technology company revolutionizing branded resale to combat fashion waste and promote sustainability. With a BA in mathematics from the University of Cambridge and an MBA MS in environmental science from Stanford University, Emily's career spans strategy consulting at BCG London and innovation at Google X, where she explored sustainable fashion and solutions. Her graduate research focused on circular economies in fashion. Recognized by Forbes 30 Under 30 and Women's Wear Daily as a top ESG leader, Emily launched Archive to empower brands like The North Face and Oscar de la Renta to build profitable resale programs. Under her leadership, Archive has raised $30 million B round funding and expanding globally, driving innovation in secondhand markets. Emily, it is a pleasure to have you today and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And you are joining us from the US, even though I detect the British accent.
I am originally from the UK, but yes, I've lived in the US for 7 years now.
Okay, well, hopefully you're not living to regret it, as many of us may be right at this moment, as we all face some interesting times in the country.
Definitely.
Why don't you share with us a little bit about your journey from studying mathematics at Cambridge to founding Archive? What inspired this transition?
Yeah, not a natural transition, but I've always been really drawn to doing hard things, picking the hardest path, because I think that's where you learn the most. So that's what drew me to studying maths at Cambridge. And then I wanted to learn as much about business. So that's what took me to BCG London after that. But at a certain point, I knew I really wanted to be having an impact with my career. That's always been something that's really important to me. So I actually first went and worked in international development, where I was working on gender equity and mobile adoption, which is a very fascinating topic for another day, but was traveling to a lot of very rural, very low income parts of the world and really saw the impact of climate change firsthand on some of the most vulnerable people in the world. And that drew me to focus my career on climate change mitigation. So I went back to school and got a master's in business and environmental science, and I spent a few years looking at the fashion industry. And I was just absolutely shocked to learn how much of a contributor fashion is. I'd bought a ton of clothes over my life. I'd never really thought about it. And when I learned that fashion was contributing 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions, I just knew I wanted to focus on that problem. And when you dig in, nearly all of that impact is coming from the production of new items. And yet we have enough clothing on Earth to clothe the next 6 generations of humanity. We literally don't need to create anything more for 6 generations and we would be fine. And yet there's this sort of vast amount of stuff being created. And I became really passionate about that and started thinking about what is the fundamental problem here, right? And it's really brands' business models and the incentive structure that they have to keep producing more new stuff and sell more new stuff, because that's the primary way that they generate revenue today. So I started thinking about how we could change that. And what if brands could actually make sizable revenue and sizable profit from reselling the things that they had already produced that just weren't being used by consumers today? And that really felt like it would flip things on its head. And that set me on this path to found Archive.
So there wasn't really an aha moment. It was much more of a discovery that stemmed following your time in school, then working at Google, and just seeing how much is out there and being
Yeah,
overwhelmed by it.
exactly. Just when you internalize the fact that we produce 100 billion items of clothing every year, when you actually think about that and all of the resources that are being poured in to make that possible, it's wild. And so I went on a journey of discovery and internalization of that. And then I think the aha moment actually came later when I was talking to a lot of brands. I just went and spoke to 100 fashion brands before founding Archive and was like, why? How are you thinking about resale? Is this on your radar at all? And I was so surprised how many of them were already, this is in 2019, 2020, were already saying, oh yeah, of course we're thinking about resale. We're seeing our customers buy our stuff and then go resell it on a third-party marketplace. Of course we will do this at some point, but it just feels very difficult. It feels very complicated. It feels very new. And so the aha moment was really around how we could enable brands to get into this space in an easier way and help them really build a business around it.
With your co-founder, Ryan
Yeah.
Rowe, what was your initial vision for Archive?
Yeah. So Ryan Rowe is an incredibly talented entrepreneur and product visionary. This is his third company. And we met really serendipitously just through a friend of a friend. He just moved back from Indonesia from COVID. It was sort of like a wild experience meeting him. But I think what he brought was really thinking about the customer experience, the user experience, and how partnering with brands could actually make the experience of buying and selling fundamentally better. I mean, I don't know how much shopping you've done on eBay or other third-party sites. We spoke to a lot of people about those experiences, and a lot of people felt like there was just so much left to be desired versus buying something new in that experience. And what brands unlock is a huge amount of data about the products that they've sold in the past, about you as a customer. And then you can actually pull all of that into a buying and selling experience and make it so much more seamless. So him and I went really deep on what that user experience could be to actually get people to buy secondhand as the norm, not as a kind of a secondary choice. And he has not only set that vision of where this goes, but also built out our entire team that actually builds the product and makes it possible for us to execute.
We've had a few guests on the show who've gone deep into the area. I would say it would be circular. If you look at what Rent the Runway does, I think you'd consider that to be circular in that it's
definitely
consistently reusing the product and eventually selling it. There are a fair amount of competitors in the space.
Yes.
Trove, they purchase Recurate, there's ThreadUp, Reflaunt, Poshmark, many folks out there that are trying to be part of the circular economy. What sets Archive apart from its competitors?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I'll say is that's a great sign for us, right? Secondhand is going to be a $350 billion market in the next few years. There's a huge opportunity here. It's relatively untapped even today from a brand perspective. And so it makes sense that a lot of people have seen this opportunity and are going after it. And I want there to be lots of solutions for brands so that they, have optionality and do this in a really effective way. At Archive, we're really focused on our technology and our product. And we differentiate ourselves through the platform that we have built and how customizable and configurable that is for our brands. What we've learned from working with, major brands like Lululemon and the North Face and New Balance is that they have a lot of different requirements and goals with launching their own resale business and a lot of kind of integrations into existing system that need to be there for this to work really effectively. And so we have the flexibility and the customizability to do that, but we're also really flexible in terms of the model that they might want to deploy. So some brands will want to choose but to start with a peer-to-peer offering. Some will choose to start with in-store trade-in. Some might choose to start with selling their damaged returns. We can be quite flexible and start with one specific model that we offer and then layer on more over time in a modular way, which has proved to be really effective for scaling this.
But you really, from what I understand, Archive enables brands to participate in the circular economy by literally putting in the infrastructure required to be circular. So a retailer doesn't have to worry about the process or about the handling or even where the inventory is going as you actually own and operate your own warehouses. Do you own the warehouses or are you working with a 3PL?
We don't own warehouses. Yeah, we've taken the approach of actually building a warehouse management system and putting that in the hands of a number of different 3PL partners who are the world's experts in resale logistics, which is a whole new world. And what we found is that gives us and the brand a lot of control over how those items are processed and the connectivity to showcase the data that we're collecting in the warehouse on the e-commerce experience in a really compelling way, but without us actually having to do the warehouse piece, so we can really focus on differentiating through software.
But your focus and goal is to basically hand a retailer brand the ability to participate in archive because you are taking on the entire process, which, as you said earlier, many retailers want to participate in the circular economy, but they don't have the means, they don't have the people or the wherewithal to do it. Archive handles it for them.
That's right. And I think that is how the world looks today for most brands, where most brands don't have a resale business that's scaled yet. They're getting into this for the first time. They want a partner that can help guide strategy, kind of have a solution that makes sense for their brand and get that live very quickly. And so we're focused on that. But as we see this industry evolve over the years, actually now some of our brand partners have 10, 15, 20 people teams running their resale business. They have a VP of resale. They have a team behind this. And so over time, we become much more of just a software provider that is allowing those people to run the business really effectively and not actually kind of the resale in a box solution that we started with.
Within your model, again, you mentioned there's peer-to-peer, there's trade-in, there's consignment. What parts of the model are most important? What do you find retailers leaning into most?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing to note with resale is that all of the software that you have to run your traditional e-commerce business doesn't make sense in this context because you need to be able to differentiate between two of this exact same shirt, but where one has a light damage and where one doesn't. And so they might be at different prices. They might be routed through a warehouse differently. And tracking all of that in a data layer and system is actually a large part of what we do that a lot of people maybe don't inherently think about. So generally, there's three pieces to our software. So the first is that e-commerce experience where we're allowing people to go on the northface.com, newbalance.com, click on the resale tab and buy secondhand items through the brand, right? Archive is not existing in this experience to a consumer. We're just the back-end software that's allowing that to be possible.
You're the intel inside.
We're exactly right. So that's part of it. Underneath that, we have all of the business tools that actually allow brands to run this as an effective and profitable business. So think merchandising, pricing, allowing you to kind of change statuses of listings and see the output of this business. How much money are you making? How many customers are you acquiring? How profitable it is, and run it as a real business. So that's another piece to what we do. And then to your question, I think the most interesting piece is actually the warehouse management system, right? Because we get these items back into one of our warehouse partners, either through in-store trade-in or through brands damages or whatever it may be. Being able to very quickly identify exactly what item this is from a brand's historical catalog and then route it through a warehouse in an intelligent way such that there's actually profit to be made at the end is the hardest part of resale, right? And that is what our WMS has been built to do and really what unlocks this as a business for brands.
You're in a very interesting space right now in terms of pricing with all the challenges facing many retailers around tariffs and increased costs. I assume your product stays the same price-wise as it was prior to this tariff catastrophe versus hopefully post.
Yes, it is a very interesting moment in time for retail in general, but definitely for resale. So yeah, as you say, clearly there's no tariffs on resale. So when brands start to now look at the comparison between their full price business and the resale business, resale is only going to become more attractive, given you don't have this additional layer of cost that you do with new items. And then secondly, I think what we're going to see is we're definitely going to see some price increases in the next, few months. Consumers are going to be looking for lower price items, right? And actually There's data that says that 59% of consumers say if a brand raises prices because of tariffs or other kind of government policies, they're going to seek more affordable options like secondhand. And so I expect that we will see an explosion in the secondhand market more broadly. And brands then have the choice, right? Do I want to own this and keep those customers within my ecosystem and serve them secondhand through my e-commerce experience in stores? Or do I want to let them go and lose them to third-party marketplaces? So, this is a fascinating moment in time as brands think about ways to diversify their business model. And I was just at a really interesting CEO conference this week with a lot of retail CEOs. And I think the sort of silver lining in all of this is that when you look historically at when moments of innovation happen, when people take these sort of leapfrog moments in changing the fundamentals of their business, often it is in these moments of chaos and uncertainty, because people are kind of more comfortable taking that step back and being like, hey, what can I challenge about our business? And what could we do differently? And they're more comfortable taking risk because there's so much inherent risk in the status quo. And so I hope, and I think we will see that much more innovation comes out in the next year. And I think that this is a big part of that will be brands thinking about their fundamental business model and leaning more into circular as a way to diversify, basically.
Well, it's a terrific tailwind that you have. Enjoy it, but just remember, it's no fun being a rich kid during the Depression. And I'll leave that. Before we talk a little bit more about growth, share with us who some of your other customers are.
Yeah, so we work with mostly fashion and apparel and footwear brands today. So working with kids brands like Hannah Anderson, luxury brands like Oscar de la Renta, DVF, Ulla Johnson, footwear brands like New Balance, Doc Martens, and outdoor brands like the North Face. So a whole range of different types of sort of fashion brands. But we're also increasingly leaning into new categories, which is interesting. So we now work with a massive home brand, an electronics brand, a toys brand, an instrument brand. We're kind of getting into these new verticals as we see our technology be able to be applicable to lots of different spaces.
Well, when I also hear you describe it being 5 or 10% of retail contribution, it also probably comes based on the way the accounting is done at the highest margin as well. So it could be 12 to 14% of gross margin contribution.
Exactly. Yeah.
But we'll leave the math for another day. I wanted to talk to you about some of your new verticals. You've touched on that, but we'll circle back. As I mentioned earlier, you've raised 30 million in your Series B round. Overall, you've raised close to 60 million to date.
Right.
How will you put that money to work? How will you use that money to grow the company over the next year, 3 years?
So first and foremost, it's investing in our core product, right? There is so many things to be built from a software perspective for resale to become a really, really sizable and optimizable part of the business for brands. So we're really investing in AI and intelligence and integrations that help brands grow this to be huge and profitable over time. So that's first and foremost. But secondly, we're expanding globally. So we've been mostly US focused to date, but we're quickly seeing a lot of pull from other markets, and Europe in particular, given there are so many tailwinds with policy, with consumer adoption, with the way that kind of brands act in those markets. So becoming a global partner for our global brands is very key. And then the third thing is that new category. So investing in anything that needs to be different for new categories to really thrive from a resale perspective.
And home, I would have to assume, knowing that category fairly well.
Yeah.
That is not easy when it comes to delivery, the last mile, putting customers together over big items. On a broader level, what are some of the challenges that you have found scaling the business? I mean, if you think about the 2 or 3 big hurdles you had to overcome at Archive, what would they be?
I think the primary one is the perception of resale in the market with brands, right? Many people are operating under the assumption that resale will not be a profitable business for them, or that it might cannibalize their full price business, because that is intuitively what you might think. And if you look at kind of other resale businesses out there, that might kind of make sense. But what we've seen in the last few years is a huge amount of data get produced that shows that, one, this does not cannibalize your full price sales. You're actually attracting a totally different customer in to buy secondhand as a brand. And actually, people knowing that they have the opportunity to buy secondhand or to sell secondhand through your brand actually makes people more willing to invest in high quality new pieces. So we see the reverse of that cannibalization. The car market is a great analogy here, right? People are more willing to buy a new car at a higher price when they know that they have the option to resell it and they know exactly what price it's going to be worth in 3 years. Like that is where this goes. And then the second myth around profitability, we've also proven to be untrue in the last couple of years. And we've actually shown that the resale business can be more profitable than the core business because you don't have any cogs and you're really just getting inventory back from people. And if we can optimize the logistics so that it's cheap to clean it and get it back onto an e-commerce experience, this can be a really profitable business. But I think that's been the biggest challenge is just education and getting those myths, changing the way that people think about those myths in the industry. And then the second thing I'll say is just the depth of the technology. This is a very, very technical problem to solve. And so you just named a great example with home, right? How do we think about this for a home brand? And thinking about the customer experience and the integrations with white glove home delivery partners and how we do that at scale, right? There's a lot of complexity. And that is both a great moat for us because it's, what we thrive in doing and we like to solve these complex problems, but it was also a challenging thing to pull off.
Talk to me as if I'm a new business prospect. I'm now the CEO of a brand. We're talking about doing business together. Explain the business model. How does that work? How do I make money? How do you make money?
Yeah. So for you, you can think about this as just an entirely new revenue stream that you're probably not tapping into at scale today. Our goal is to make that as profitable, if not more profitable than the margin on your core business. So it's a profitable, fast-growing new revenue stream. And it also has some sort of side benefits, things like new customer acquisition, things like loyalty. We see people come back into a brand to resell, take a gift card, and then go on to spend that again full price with you. And then, of course, kind of sustainability and messaging and branding. This is a huge thing to be investing in from that perspective as well. From our perspective, we have a mixed model. So we have subscription fees and then we charge a commission on the end sale, much like sort of Shopify or other pricing models like that. But what we will do is build out a business case with you to make sure that there is going to be a really exciting amount of profit at the end of the day. So this is not something where you have to invest for years and years to kind of break even. This is something where you can start to see profit within a few months.
And in terms of the customer, if I have something that's North Face, it's sitting in my closet.
Yep.
And I want to try to realize value. I have options. I can go to a Poshmark. How do I reach out to the brand? How do I sell my product back to the brand through archive? Again, I won't know that it's archive, but it's a brand that's operating on the archive model. What do I do?
So with North Face today, you could go into any of the 100 North Face stores in the US and Canada with that item, and you would be issued a gift card for it using our software. So that is a really seamless experience. You just drop it off in store. You can also mail it in and get the credit that way. For some of our other brands, they're also operating our peer-to-peer model, which would mean that you could list it directly. So yes. Lafleur is a really interesting example of a brand where they actually have both. So if you have an Lafleur item, you can go on to Second Act, their pre-loved business, and decide, hey, do I want to list this myself? I'm probably going to get a little bit more money back, but I also have to wait for it to sell and it's a little bit more work. Or do I want to just ship it to Lafleur or drop it off in one of their stores today, get immediate credit back for that item, but it's probably going to be a little bit less value than I might get if I'm willing to wait it out.
So I love the fact that the currency is a gift card.
Yeah.
Because we all understand the potential markup of that, or the cost, really, I should say, of that card could be a third of the retail value of the card. So exactly. The customer leaves feeling that they have something much more, though they have to buy it from the brand with that gift card, but it costs the retailer a lot less. Now, when the retailer takes it into their store, then what happens?
The items, where do they go?
Yes, yeah. Where do the items go?
So you drop off a North Face item in store, you get your gift card, you're in store, you probably use it that day at kind of like a 3x multiple is generally what we see. Those items are then going to get shipped to one of our warehouse partners. And the first thing that we do is we match that product to the original SKU. So we know, okay, this is the Nupsy jacket from 2018. We have a huge amount of data already through our integrations on what the original price of that was, all of the photography, the names, the descriptions. So we can come up with an estimated resale price based on that, which is much more sophisticated than would be elsewhere. And then we can route that item through the warehouse to get listed in a way that is guaranteed to be profitable. So if it's a $400 Nuptse jacket that we know is going to resell for $200 and it needs cleaning, we can afford to do that. If it's a $20 t-shirt, we might not. And we would route that directly to recycling because profitability is really the end goal here and something that we kind of guarantee for all of our brand. So that item gets routed and then would get listed onto the North Face Renewed, which is North Face's resale business. Someone else could go onto the northface.com, purchase that item, and it would be shipped to them in the same way that traditional e-commerce works.
So is it fair to say the majority of products sold by the brands is sold online versus taken in at the store, returned at the store, and sold in the store?
Yeah, we have some brands experimenting with in-store selling and the ability to actually go and buy secondhand items in store. And we're seeing brands want to have, a rack of secondhand items within their store. But I would say that's a much earlier in its journey, that part of our business. And so the vast majority are being sold through e-com today.
I really like the model. It's fascinating. How do the stores know how much to give the customer or what to put on the gift card on a per item basis?
Yeah, so that's what our software does. They would type in the SKU number. They're going to be told, they might be asked a question about condition. You can kind of differentiate by condition if we want retail associates to do that level of entering. But what we can do is price that down to the SKU level. So we can actually say, oh, wow, this is a really new item that we know is like flying off the shelves from an e-commerce perspective. Let's actually give the customer more for this. Or actually, this is something that we probably aren't as confident will sell. So we'll give kind of a lower gift card and we can be quite versatile in that while also protecting that end customer experience.
All right. And the last nitty gritty question I'll ask you.
Yeah.
What cost gets assigned to that item?
From an accounting perspective?
Yeah.
Yes, there's no COGS in a traditional sense, right? You've already accounted for the COGS the first time you sold that item. So the gift card, although of course you have to think about the upspend on that, and generally people are, a lot of brands think about that as a marketing activation because you have someone now in store with a gift card. And then so the only true COG is the logistics cost of checking it in, checking the condition, cleaning it if needed, and anything associated with pick, pack, ship. So that is what our WMS software is tracking and what we're minimizing for brands. So you can actually reduce the COGS of selling this item by a huge amount. And that's why this business can be really profitable.
When you're thinking about increasing revenue and you're speaking about increasing revenue, I guess what I'm assuming is revenue generated by that gift card and then revenue generated on the apparel as well. Is that how you're expressing it?
I'm mostly talking about the revenue stream of actually reselling the secondhand products. And then there's this sort of incremental pot that you're going to get from the gift card upspend. But our goal is to make the resale business itself a really sizable amount of your revenue. Today, our largest brand, it's 5%, so it's still small, but it's not nothing. And it's growing, 50%, 2x year on year is generally what we're seeing with our partners. And so the ability for that to become 10, 20, 30% over time feels really doable at this point. In the same way that when, brands launched e-commerce 20 years ago, it did start off as 1% or 2%. And then, now today they think of it as such a fundamental part of the business and the growth. And that's where we see resale heading.
I now understand the model even better and maybe understand why one of your investors who I had to vet you with before we jumped on the call today, Scott Friend, said such nice things about you and how smart you are. And I can say now I get it. Speaking of smart and speaking about challenges, tell me a little bit more about the challenges you face being a female founder in a tech-driven industry.
Yeah, I wish there were more female founders. There is not a lot of venture funding going to female founders. So that is a huge challenge. But honestly, for me, it's been less about me being a woman and more about starting a company in an industry which is still mostly powered by women. If you ask any female consumer in the whole world, resale is an incredibly obvious bet, right? The average female consumer has bought secondhand. A lot of who I'm pitching to when I'm fundraising are VCs, a lot of whom are male and generally haven't bought a ton of stuff secondhand, right? From an income perspective, from a kind of interest perspective, this is not something that most of them personally engage with. Of course, there are exceptions. And so it takes longer for them to wrap their head around why people would want secondhand, why this industry is booming, why it's so obvious, than it would with sort of the average person on the street.
What advice would you give to an aspiring entrepreneur looking to make an impact in sustainability focused industries?
Yeah, I think so much. I mean, being an entrepreneur is incredibly hard. And so much of it is about the first year of the journey where you're really figuring out what industry do I want to be in? What impact do I want to have? Where do I want to put all of this energy and effort and this commitment, this huge time commitment that I'm jumping into? And so I think the advice I would give in that stage is to really look at the data while you're ideating, especially if you're thinking about sustainability impact. I'm a huge believer in asking yourself the question, what would happen if I didn't start this company? What is the counterfactual? And look for a sustainability problem that is hugely problematic, where you can have a huge impact, but where there's also maybe not that many people working on it. What drew me to sustainable fashion is it's actually relatively under-resourced relative to the crazy amount of investment that has gone into renewable energy, into electric vehicles, into other parts of the climate problem, right? So looking for huge problem, under-resourced, and then a space where you feel like your personal strengths could move the needle. And that's where there's desperation for innovation and you're more likely to be successful.
Share with us just some examples of some of the great results you and your team have been able to put forward with companies like the North Face or New Balance. So I think our listeners can really understand how true impact has been made across different verticals, apparel, footwear, but in our industry.
Yeah. I'll start with Emily Gittins because it was interestingly our first brand that we launched with. And just in year one, we managed to boost their annual revenue by 3% from launching a resale business, which, is a pretty significant jump for a brand to have just in the first year. And what we see is that 3% can become 5% over, a couple of years. And then brands have aspirations to make this 10, 20% of their revenue growth in the next few years. So it really can be sizable. The other thing I'll speak to is just the ability for us to grow this business by adding new channels. So brands like Farity have added new sales channels and grown the business by 40% just by layering that on. We see across the board that this is a huge customer acquisition strategy. Across all of our brands, about 60, 70% of the customers that are being acquired through resale are totally new to the brand. And then many of them go on to buy full price over time and actually become a more loyal customer. And the final stat I share is when we look at lifetime value of a customer who buys resale, it's 2 to 3x a customer who's just buying new. So even where you do have overlap between customers buying used and new, you're driving a higher lifetime value by offering both.
Assuming your entire team is going to listen to this podcast, what message do you want to share with them?
It's a great question. I think what is exciting to me is that we are really just at the beginning of this journey. It is day one for branded resale. And that means that there's still so much to figure out and so much that is going to change in this industry in the next few years. I think we'll look back at what we're doing today in 5 years' time and just laugh at, how silly and simple it all seemed at this time, because I expect so much evolution. And so while our business is doing well, I encourage the team to not assume we have all the answers. Let's not be afraid to just flip everything on its head. Let's keep testing. Let's keep experimenting. Let's keep thinking out of the box, because that's what it's going to take to make this an absolutely critical part of every brand's business in the world, which is our goal.
And I would also think that they'd be pretty excited to know that the resale market is projected to double by 2028. Is that correct? I read that somewhere.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And that was pre the last week. So maybe even more than that expected now.
Right. As tariffs go up, so does your business. So
exactly.
There's got to be a winner there somewhere. It's the silver lining. All right, let's pivot to the last part of the podcast, rapid fire. Who would you most like to meet?
I'll say Bill Gates. I know it's a classic answer, but just the impact that he's had on poverty eradication in particular would make him someone I really wanted to talk to.
Favorite streamed show?
Severance, right now.
Top place to vacation?
The Andaman Islands in India. I'm a diver. It's the most incredible place to dive.
If you were not running Archive, what would you be doing?
Something in climate, super interested in decarbonization strategies like direct air capture or something like that. So potentially something in that space.
Finally, what is your go-to interview question?
I like to ask people, tell me about something that you've accomplished outside of work. What motivated you? What drove you to do that really hard, challenging thing? You learn a lot about someone from that question.
And with that, we'll end this flight of the Retail Pilot. Emily, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Ken.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's flight of the Retail Pilot. And please give us a review on your favorite podcast platform.